Christmas decorating pretty much done. I'm gonna go check for Christmas cards in the mail. Well, a question I get from you guys all the time is, what is overworking? How do I know what it is? What does it look like? It's a little difficult to define because it can be several things, but let's go up in my studio. I'm gonna get cleaned up a little bit and we'll see if we can nail it down for you. Alright, so let's look at some of the reasons or causes behind overworking. Let's talk about what it looks like, how to identify it. Now, it can be kind of difficult and it may take time. Right at first you won't see it, but over time, studying good watercolor painting, you'll begin to see it little by little. And honestly, it's kind of subjective. One person's overworking is another person's beautiful painting. But there are things that I think that you can see over time and begin to identify to kind of work out of your work. So if you're a beginner, don't worry about it so much. Just paint, just practice. If you feel like you're overworking, go ahead and keep overworking it, because what you're doing is you're learning, you're trying to correct and manage your strokes, your color, your washes all at once. So don't be really overly worried about it, knowing exactly what overworking looks like when you're a beginner. But do keep an eye out for these things as you gain skills. And one of the key things that will develop as you develop is that you'll start to see it. As you study really good watercolor, you'll start to see how great watercolor looks fresh, it looks immediate, it looks intentional, and you'll start to see the paintings that don't look that way. The ones that look like they were labored, they were very muddled, and just generally overdone. Now, when you put down a wash, the goal is to put it down as cleanly and as smoothly and quickly as possible. And that means that you can charge in. You know, charging in is just adding heavier pigment to flow with it when it's wet. But it comes to a point when you need to get your brush out of there and leave it alone. As you brush things, a lot of times the tendency is to get more water, or you have more water in your brush. So what you're doing is you're putting more water on the wash. I'm going to try to overbrush this, and you're pushing pigment out towards the edge, and so you get watercolor areas that they don't look smooth. They look light in the center and dark towards the outside. You also get washes that look splotchy. You start to loosen up the fibers of the paper, and then you get a mottled look. By the way, everything I'm saying here is usually magnified 2 or 3-fold by using cheap or non-cotton paper. All of these symptoms usually happen to greater degrees with non-cotton paper. If you're experienced, you usually can paint on non-cotton paper, or cheaper paper is okay, but it's very difficult when you're a beginner. The other thing is, as you start to brush too much, and the bigger the wash, the more this is true, certain areas start to dry sooner than others. So I'm continuing, you know, it could be for whatever reason. You don't think the color's deep enough to begin with, and then you look at it and you say, oh, that's too dark, so you get more water in your brush and you go back. A lot of brushing and overbrushing something is usually just a state of indecision. And don't panic, beginners. Just be aware of it. So you may end up with a wash like this. And I don't know if this shows on camera, but the paper has started to pill where I brushed the heaviest. I have varying amounts of pigment drying in varying degrees. I have pigment pushing towards the outside due to too much water in the center. That's overworking example number 1. Doing it the right way, you want to put down a nice, clean wash, minimal amount of stroking, and not too much water. And so usually what that means is just getting your value right on the palette or on a test piece. Don't be afraid to use test swatches. Now, certain amount of variegation in the wash is okay. That's one of the beauties of watercolor. Most of the overbrushing problems are just a lack of skill in water and brush management, and that just comes with time. Okay, a second reason, symptom, or example is painting in the danger zone. If you've seen my other videos, I talk about the stages of wetness. There's one called the danger zone, and that's when it's matte damp. Not letting your paint dry to bone dry before adding other paint. Sometimes you can get away with it, but it causes back runs, and a lot of times to manage or kind of eliminate the back run, you end up going back and stroking over it, and you have the same problem as you had up here. Just a streaky, splotchy mess. And the problem is, the more it happens, the more you want to try to fix it. And you know, if I were to come up with a definition for overworking, that would probably be my definition in a nutshell. Trying to fix a problem and trying again and trying again and trying again. That probably right there causes more overworking issues than just about anything. So I started painting in this before it was completely dry, and a lot of times it happens when you're trying to maybe subtly change the color, maybe you're trying to darken it, but you get partially dried edges that are overlapping the other edges. You lift and push paint in the center, which is a symptom of back run, and it's just not working to watercolor strengths, basically. Another symptom of overstroking, and this works for both the first example and the second example of painting in the danger zone. The more you stroke, the more of a grainy look your paper takes on. Now, some of that's okay. You can get a kind of a grainy texture even doing very little, but it gets more pronounced the more you stroke and try to change a wash. And again, it's overbrushing as I did in the first example, but I'm overbrushing because I tried to correct it too soon, and then I end up trying to fix problems. So I'm going to go over here and add a light wash and show you if you want to change the color on it or make it darker, you use a glaze. And you basically put one really clean wash over another without overbrushing. So here you see that I put that wash down very simply, very cleanly, and I'm just going back in here and lifting some of this water that's pooling and running down to the edge, and I'm going to let that dry. Now this is completely dry, and if you want to correct by making a color darker or even slightly tinting or change it, that's what you need to do first. Try for a nice clean wash, and then secondly, make sure it's bone dry. So we're going to darken it just like we did this side over here, and you just do the very same thing. You just put a nice clean glaze or wash right over the top. These are not horrendous examples. For instance, if this were part of your painting, you may not necessarily look at that and go, oh, that's just awful overworking. But what I am trying to show you is an example of a clean, fresh wash versus something that's been labored over. And it's not showing up too well, but that's sort of the point behind overworking. So, overbrushing when you put down your initial wash, painting over a wash that's not completely dry, and overbrushing that. Now number 3, and this is a big one, too many colors. Too many color changes. Okay, I'm going to get a nice kind of gold green here. And it's really the same symptom as this. And that's just overbrushing. And a lot of times it's just indecision. You know, try to make a decision and stick with it. You go, okay, I want to add some orange. That wasn't really the right color. I want it to be a little more golden than that. Here's some red. And you go, oh man, look at that red. That's just way too intense. So now you're back in, like in this mode up here. You're correcting. You're spending all your brush strokes, you know, correcting. Maybe you panic and you blot. You say, okay, well, that's not at all right. We blot all that up, and it's starting to look splotchy. Here's some purple. Oh, you know, purple is a complement of yellow. And what did I do? I just destroyed it. Now it looks like mud. And I'm starting to get this grainy pill look because I have brushed it so much and I have lifted so much. Okay? That's a classic overworking look. Muddy, overbrushed, grainy and pilly. Again, I think you get the point. And I'm going to put a layer down here, and we'll talk about correcting it. It goes right along with the color change idea up here, or darkening. But stop. Just stop for a minute. You have time because you're going to let it dry. Just stop and think through your color theory. Grab a color wheel and say, what color do I really want that to be? What value do I really want that to be? Do some swatches and say, oh, that's it. That's what I want. And then say, now what do I need to add to yellow to make it more of a deep red? Or what do I want to add to that to make it more blue? Well, you're probably not going to make it blue because if you do that, it's going to come out green. But you get the point. Think through your mixing, because what you're doing when you put a layer on this, you're visually mixing the color on top with the color underneath. So just take a breath, just stop, think through, let your wash dry, even if you don't think it's right, and think through the color you need to apply over that to change it. So I hope you can see how these things all sort of overlap and work together. So I ended up with roughly the same color, but this is a little cleaner looking, not as splotchy, and looks more deliberate. Now the last one kind of fits in a category by itself, but it does share some characteristics of the other, and that's adding detail. Adding detail is fine as long as it's purposeful. And this is why with watercolor I think it's important to do studies. But adding detail is fine unless you keep adding detail that you hadn't planned on adding. And this is where I got into trouble in my last video when I said parts of it looked overworked. It's because I had to add layers that I didn't want to add, or add areas that just kept getting darker that I hadn't planned on adding. So it tended to get a little bit overworked, and then I was lifting, and a certain amount of lifting is fine. It could be a color change. You go, oh, well, I want a tree line here in front of this. It's going to be this sort of brownish, wintry tree line. Okay? This is a common overworking mistake. It's like you didn't want something there to begin with, but you really feel like you need it, and so you just paint over it. And now you have a layer that doesn't look like it was planned. It doesn't look like it was intended. It looks like an afterthought. And you've got edges of the layer underneath it showing. And some of that is okay. But imagine doing this 3 or 4 or 5 times. And then you start to get into areas that look clearly overworked. And they just turn into dark blotches. So that's sort of defining overworking for you. Now these are not the only ones. There might be different manifestations of each of these, but they're things in general to look out for. And as I said, as you learn, as you look at lots of watercolor, as you put down your own brush strokes and you compare to the brush strokes of more accomplished watercolorists, and I don't mean comparing in the sense of, oh, he's great, oh, I'm bad. I mean comparing in the sense of technique. Do I have my technique right? That's a valid way to learn, by the way. People who say you should never compare are not being specific enough. Don't compare your progress with somebody else's. That's a whole nother video, though. But do compare your techniques when you're learning, accomplishing those techniques properly. That's the comparing I'm talking about. I hope this was a helpful video, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.